A Milwaukee County judge
Her behavior was unconscionable.
hauled away in handcuffs.
A public spectacle designed to humiliate a sitting judge.
This week on Open Record,
Shame on her.
a showdown over immigration enforcement
What she did was right.
in the halls of the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
Judge Dugan was simply doing her job.
She violated the law. She did not do her job. She's being an activist judge.
That once again has Wisconsin
We were all concerned about how it transpired.
in the national spotlight. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I am joined once again by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Fox 6 reporter Bill Miston. Bill, thanks for being here.
Good morning.
First time in the podcast studio, is that right?
Yeah.
I can't believe it's taken this long.
Yeah, I feel honored.
Oh, well, we're glad that you are here. It was funny because before before we started, I said we were having a guest in via Zoom, and Bill thought we were all going to be Zoom, and he's like, "You mean I don't get to be in the podcast studio again?" But we're very glad you are here. It's long overdue. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, April 30th. As we record, it has been 5 days since Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan was led away from the courthouse in handcuffs. The FBI arrested her for obstructing a federal agency and concealing an individual to prevent his arrest. It has been an extraordinary several days. Once again, the national spotlight is shining on Wisconsin. We're going to take you through a factual account of what happened both inside and outside Judge Dugan's courtroom based on what we know from public records. We'll talk about the legal and political reactions and implications, and we'll offer some historical context and talk about what happens next. All of that starts right after this. We are back on Open Record. Bill, you are Fox 6's primary crime and courts reporter, so you know the courthouse probably better than anyone at Fox 6 News. I know that. Let's start with April 18th, because this all happened actually a week before really things went crazy after the arrest of Judge Dugan. But I want to start with April 18th. This is Eduardo Flores Ruiz is on the docket. What is that all about, and what happened? Why was he scheduled before Judge Dugan?
Well, Eduardo Flores Ruiz was arrested and charged by prosecutors in March of this year with a criminal misdemeanor battery case. And he was scheduled to be before Judge Dugan that morning for a hearing regarding that case. And what we do know is that he was removed from the country back in 2013, and at some point he returned to U.S. soil. And so he was out of custody and in Judge Dugan's county courtroom for a hearing when federal filings say a state public defender who was present there at the courthouse, but not there for Dugan's case, or for Flores Ruiz's case, saw that there were ICE agents, FBI agents in the hallway, and went into Judge Dugan's courtroom and notified her clerk about that.
So you said he was removed from the country in 2013. Do we know anything about why he was deported back then, what the circumstances were at the time, or we just know that he was removed and now he's back here?
We know that he was removed. It appears that when he was found, he was removed that same day, based on what we've been able to see in federal filings. Have not had a chance to dig much too deeply into that. Is the focus of the case is, he's been indicted for reentry of a removed alien by the feds since this all happened last week. And really the focus now is on what happened at that time in the courtroom and then after, leading up to last Friday.
What were some of the charges that Ruiz was facing this time around?
Misdemeanor battery charges. I don't have the details in front of me.
That's why I brought my laptop, Bill, because I was like, I know we're going to want to refer to that, but I know they're domestic violence related charges.
They were domestic violence related charges for an incident that happened back in March. And
as I recall, he was accused of he punched someone like 30 times. I mean, it's misdemeanor battery, but it sounds like a fairly violent situation.
And there were some questions even when he appeared in his federal case, whether he was living at that location where this happened or staying there and lived elsewhere. But we do know that he was charged in connection to whatever happened back in March and had not been found guilty, right?
Yeah, so he wasn't convicted. These are pending charges.
Charges. Yeah. And it doesn't appear that he has a criminal history here in Wisconsin.
Other than the previous deportation.
Well,
Well, because it's not a criminal history, but I mean, other than that,
other than the charge that he's currently facing.
That is the reason that ICE agents were looking for him, was simply because of the re-entry into the country, correct? It wasn't, because in this case, it wouldn't be based on his criminal
Based on the charges,
because he had not yet been convicted. Is that correct?
Well, in speaking with immigration lawyers, this is a thing that has happened for years. It's been on the books that there is nothing that precludes you from being picked up by federal agents if you are here in the country illegally, whether or not you have or have not committed a crime, whether you've been convicted of a crime or not. There is no legal right for you to be here in the country unless there is some other determination by an immigration judge, whether that's asylum, something like that. And so, by all indications, Flores Ruiz was removed in 2013 and at some point came back here. And at some point, federal agents became aware of him being here. Back.
And my understanding, it's because of these charges they became aware, because there was some sort of a fingerprint analysis that a federal agent or an ICE agent detected and said, okay, now we know this is the guy who was kicked out in 2013. We know because of the new charges and this fingerprint analysis that he's here again. Because I think that's the question that I have. I don't know about you, is there are so many people who are here without proper documentation, who are not in the country legally, that would have intersections with the courthouse. The question is, why Flores Ruiz? Why was this the case that this blew up over? It's not as though this was, I don't know, and by the way, I don't know if viewers can hear, there's work going on around the studio. If you hear that, we're not doing that. But he was not here because or they were not singling him out because of some violent gang affiliation or anything like that. Do we know why? In this case, it seems as though it was just that fingerprint connection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it seems. And I'm just going back over some of the notes here regarding Mr. Flores Ruiz. And according to the government, that he was removed from the U.S. in 2013 and re-entered, that there was a fingerprint match and nothing in the file showing that he had asked to come back to the United States. It says here that the government notes to a judge during his appearance that Flores Ruiz was charged in March, and he came to that hearing on April 18th before Judge Dugan. He did not understand that he was facing deportation and at some point became aware of ICE agents. And this is what is said by the federal government in Flores Ruiz's hearing when he was charged by complaint. I'd said indictment earlier. He was charged by complaint of reentry of an alien to the U.S. And so it's really at that juncture that really kind of sets in motion what happened over the next 7 days.
So Flores Ruiz is in court for this hearing. ICE agents show up in the hallway. And my understanding is there were several of them, and they initially made contact with the court. They tell I think maybe it's the clerk, they tell someone or a bailiff, I'm not sure who, that, we're here and we're here for Flores Ruiz. We have a warrant for his arrest. And then that is conveyed to the judge. And that's kind of where all of this starts to spill over. Is that right?
What we do know is that once the clerk is made aware by this public defender who is in the hallway, even took photos of some of the agents who were there and notified the clerk. Federal filings say the clerk then told the judge, who said something to the effect of, quote, "This is absurd," and goes out of her courtroom into the hallway. And
so she was visibly angry, right? The judge was not happy that ICE was there to get this person.
That's what federal filings say Judge Dugan's state of mind was. And at some point, federal filings say she went into the hallway, confronted the agents, and said, "You need to go down the hall to Chief Judge Carl Ashley's courtroom, or his chambers, his office, which is right next door to Judge Dugan's courtroom on the 6th floor of the main courthouse."
So you're not sending them 6 floors away. This is right. Okay, sure.
Yeah. And so at that point, the agents go there. Judge Ashley was not there, but they were able to get him on the phone, and he had asked what type of warrant they have. Federal filings say they're told that it's an administrative warrant, which is generally standard for removal procedures for a person. Judge Ashley said that is legal and valid, or to that extent. And said, please don't do any type of arrest in a private area, do in a public area. And the suggestion was said like a hallway. And he said, yes, that's permissible. And I'm paraphrasing here. And so at that point, what we do know is that at some point, Judge Dugan goes back into her courtroom after those agents leave. And while the agents were in Chief Judge Ashley's courtroom, a federal prosecutor say a courtroom deputy told agents that Dugan returned to the bench and was, quote, pushing the Flores Ruiz case through. Filings say Dugan then later escorted Flores Ruiz and his attorney through a back door.
And in fact, sounds like she ordered them out the back door.
Yeah.
Didn't just sort of offer, but said, you need to go this way. I want to point something out because I think it's in, and as I'm reading, this is now granted, this is the government's accusation. This is in the federal case, the complaint against Judge Dugan. It does say that the FBI agents, when they arrived, they advised the courtroom deputy that they were working with ICE and were planning to arrest Flores Ruiz. So they made active contact to say, we're here, this is our plan. The deputy said, wait outside and arrest him after the hearing. Go out there in the public hallway and do this. But after that notification was made is when the buzz starts happening in the courtroom, when the defense attorney gets wind, when the defense attorney apparently talks to the judge, when the judge says, we're going to send them off to the chief judge's office and speed this whole thing along. And it sounds like the allegation is she rushed the case to get it through while the agents are distracted, while they're away, and then ushers them out the back door. Those are the allegations that form the federal complaint for obstructing and for helping to conceal this person. That is ultimately what leads to her charges. But for Flores Ruiz, it's not the end of things, because while she does rush that case through, or it appears, at least according to the government's allegations, that's what happened, and takes him out the back door, there was another ICE agent in plain clothes waiting behind. Is that right? So all the others are in Chief Judge's office, but there's one still in the hallway keeping an eye. And
what we understand from federal filings is that this agent was not noticed by that other attorney that had taken photos of these agents and gone into Judge Dugan's courtroom. So this agent is still in the hallway, and at some point there is acknowledgement or seeing that Flores Ruiz and his attorney come out from a doorway that is a non-public area into the hallway and proceed to get into the elevator.
And by the way, there are two banks of elevators on the 6th floor of the courthouse. One was closer to Judge Dugan's courtroom. This plainclothes ICE agent apparently noticed that he had gotten onto the elevators farthest away. So he's come out of non-public door and then ends up on this other bank of elevators. A chase ensues at that point. Is that right?
What we do know is that at some point he's in a public area and gets on an elevator and goes all the way from the 6th floor of the main courthouse down to a floor that you can exit the courthouse onto 10th Street. So on the west side, of the main courthouse. At some point, there's a notification that there are agents that are also outside the courthouse. In the filings, it says that the agents were by the flagpoles, so presumably
west side,
on the south side of the courthouse. They're by
south side, yeah, right, okay, sure,
because that's where flagpoles are. And that a chase ensues, and that Flores Ruiz is ultimately arrested near the corner of 10th and State.
So to summarize all of this, it sounds like the judge was not happy. Judge Dugan was not happy that ICE agents had come to the courthouse to effectuate arrest on someone in her courtroom. She sends them off to the chief judge's office because they have an administrative warrant, which is one that ICE can produce on its own without a judge signing it. Not a judicial warrant, which requires a higher standard. You have to go before a judge. She says that's not good enough. Go to the chief judge. Meanwhile, the allegations are she sneaks him out the back, hurries up their case, sneaks him out the back, and then tries to get him, on his way, and ICE agents catch him anyway. But the fact that this occurred, that this attempt to help him sort of get away from ICE agents happens, is what leads to what happens last Friday. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the extraordinary arrest of a sitting judge in Milwaukee County as Judge Dugan is led away in handcuffs. We'll do that right after this. We are back on Open Record. So before we get to what happened to Judge Dugan on Friday, the 25th, you said that the defense made some points when he came before the federal court. What was the defense's, what was some of what they said?
So the defense acknowledged that Flores Ruiz was in court for the misdemeanor battery case. He was in jail for 5 days and that he showed up to court voluntarily. And while at the court hearing, his attorney said that there was confusion and fear that was brought on by ICE agents. Says that the defense attorney says he wasn't present, but understand from what was read in the media that the chief judge was involved and another judge assisted him, and that he had counsel present and was acting on advice of counsel, and that the defendant was walking out and heard someone yell his name and saw people not in uniform. The defense attorney in the federal case says that Flores Ruiz fled because he was scared, and his defense attorney said that Flores Ruiz was put into a bad situation where instincts took over, and that was during arguments about whether or not Flores Ruiz could be released on these federal charges.
So obviously he's facing his own legal, situation because of the fact that he's here illegally, the fact that he apparently, they're saying, tried to run. He's saying, well, I only ran because these are plainclothes people. I don't know who they are. And I'm just following my attorney's advice to go. But Judge Dugan is the one who right now is the center of all the attention. And on Friday, a pretty extraordinary thing happened. Friday, the 25th, we hear that the FBI, arrested Judge Dugan, led her away from the Milwaukee County Courthouse in handcuffs, and actually, in a pretty unusual move, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, actually tweets out a photo of Judge Dugan being led away in handcuffs. There's been a lot of criticism of that from some who say that looked like sort of a photo op, that was inappropriate, and others who have spoken up. I know Frank Gimble, longtime legal advisor here, or someone who's come on as a consultant here for Fox 6 News, he spoke out and said he thought it was outrageous because why wouldn't a judge be allowed to appear on her own? Was it necessary to lead her away in handcuffs? They know where that she lives. Federal court, they would typically set an appointment, give an option. So there's been some of that. What we know is it's been a flashpoint politically and just in terms of conversation nationally. Immigration has been a big issue for the Trump administration. That was no secret coming into to the administration. This is the first major showdown in Milwaukee over this that we know of happening at the courthouse. So Judge Dugan is arrested. And since then, I mean, that's really where, Bill, this is blown up. I mean, what kind of reaction have you seen to that arrest last Friday?
Well, I think we had known that there was a possibility that there was some looking into about what happened. And then when we learned that Judge Dugan was arrested, first thing is you're going immediately to the federal courthouse as you're anticipating that she's going to be making a court appearance on those, whatever she was charged with. We didn't know what she was charged with, but then ultimately goes into court before a magistrate judge. Hearing is very quick, about 3 minutes or so in length. And she is there along with an attorney, Craig Mastantuono, who had been present at the Milwaukee County Courthouse in the several weeks prior when some of these issues about ICE arrests had been going on in or near the Milwaukee County Courthouse complex. So he very well aware of kind of the simmering nature that was involved. And so Judge Dugan appears. Obviously, there's no reason to suspect that she won't return to court, and even Magistrate Stephen Dries said that there isn't anything that they would be able to detain her on based on the charges, and ordered her released immediately. So then she was processed through and then whisked out the back door of the federal courthouse as a large group of people had, as word spread about Judge Dugan's arrest, came to the federal courthouse demanding her release.
Go ahead. No, you.
I feel like we saw almost every politician in Wisconsin issue a statement. I mean, the Common Council did, the county board did, the mayor did. Every elected official you can think of issued a statement, because this is one that called for some, whatever your reaction, you've got some saying this was unconscionable. The Democratic National Committee said federal goons came and arrested a judge. And meanwhile, you have Republican lawmakers in Wisconsin saying that her behavior was over the top and reprehensible. So you've got these really strong opinions on both sides. There are protests, things like this happen. But in the end, we have a judge who is facing federal charges, and it comes down to this arrest at the courthouse. I guess what I've been wondering all along is why all of a sudden now? Why an arrest at the courthouse blows up like this today? Because this isn't the first arrest by ICE at a courthouse, at or near a courthouse, although we've seen an increase in that kind of activity slowly occurring. I did look back. In 2021, under the Biden administration, there was a guidance document from the Department of Homeland Security, which provided guidance for ICE and the Border Patrol. And it talked about activities near protected areas, enforcement actions near protected areas. And in that 2021 document essentially said a protected area is a school, a medical facility, a place of worship, things like that, places where children gather, playgrounds, recreation centers, social services establishments, domestic violence shelters. It doesn't mention courthouses, but it said that essentially enforcement action should not take place near any of these areas if at all possible. The Trump administration comes in 2025 and issues a guidance document that says, yeah, about all that. Case-by-case basis, there are no prohibitions on any of these things. And in particular, courts and courthouses, sometimes that just has to happen.
And it's important to note, too, in previous administrations, even going back to George W. Bush, shortly after 9/11, in talking with immigration attorneys, the uptick in arrests by ICE agents in or near courthouses, they said, look, that was happening back shortly after 9/11 and in the years that followed. We also know that under former President Barack Obama, there were a lot of ICE enforcement that was done that called into question, there were a lot of Democrats that were opposed to President Obama's use of deportation of individuals in the country. And so it's important to note in talking with immigration attorneys that it's not uncommon for federal law enforcement, whether it's FBI, ICE agents, Homeland Security, DEA, ATF, that if they know that someone is going to be in some place because of using public records and knowing this, that if they're looking for someone, they will go there to find them.
I've used that so many times over the years when we're
Right.
looking for
You know
someone
they're
for
gonna
a
be
story.
somewhere.
It's
Yeah.
the courthouse where there's a criminal case and a hearing that we know they're going to be
Yeah.
there. And if they're out of custody, the hallway is the place you're going to have a chance to ask them questions. I've done that time and time again. So it makes sense. But you have other people who go, okay, but wait a minute. It might make sense in terms of if you want to find the guy and catch him, great. The concern some express is that for anyone who is interacting with the court system, witnesses, victims, people who have other kinds of court business, defendants, but also people who need to access services that are at the courthouse, they might be fearful that if the courthouse is crawling with ICE agents, I'm not going anywhere near it. And there's the concern that this sends the message the courthouse is not a safe place for an entire group of people. So there is that other side. On the one hand, it makes logical sense. You'd go where the appointment is.
And several weeks ago, there was, after some of the arrests that had happened previous to this one at the Milwaukee County Courthouse complex, there were a lot of people concerned about what was happening. And what you kept on hearing time and time again was that this would have a chilling effect on the justice system itself. Because if you have people who are here undocumented, charged with crimes, and they're coming to court on their own volition and following the rules, that it would have a chilling effect for that. It would have a chilling effect for witnesses who are either witnesses to crimes or witnesses in other legal matters, that it would have a chilling effect to keep them from coming to court. It would have a chilling effect because if people are then removed from the country, if there are people who are victims of crimes, they may never get the justice that they are seeking in the circuit court system.
Well, we know there were victims waiting in court the day that this all happened, so they didn't get sort of their day in court in this case. I do want to point out one quick thing. That guidance document that was passed by or introduced by the Trump administration in January of this year, one of the things it reads with regard, it's titled Alien Subject, or this subsection is titled Alien Subject to Enforcement Actions. And it says, generally, ICE's civil immigration enforcement actions in or near courthouses includes actions against targeted aliens. And then it lists who, quote unquote, targeted aliens are: national security or public safety threats, specific aliens with criminal convictions, gang members, aliens who've been ordered removed from the United States but have failed to depart. In this case, it was one who actually came back. And aliens, here we go, aliens who've re-entered the country illegally after being removed. So they're saying there are certain categories of people who are here illegally who we're going to target with courthouse actions. According to this guidance document, Flores Ruiz appears to fall within that. It does not say someone who doesn't meet any of these things and happens to be a crime victim, we're going to come and take them away. It does say there are specific targets, and Flores Ruiz falls within that.
And we do know that some of the other arrests that had happened at the courthouse, those were people that either had previously been convicted of crimes here in Wisconsin, had pending cases. There were allegations by the federal government that at least one of the men was a gang member. So it's some of those arrests that we do know of that we have been able to tie names to and track through the system, that those would have fallen under some of these specific enforcement actions under the January 21st directive.
I don't want to. Oh, go ahead.
Wasn't the county also working through some sort of new policy for ICE arrests, like at the same time here?
They were not working through it only after the fact. So it was after
they sure are now.
Well, yeah, right.
So after some of these arrests had happened at the courthouse in the previous several weeks or month, it's kind of running together. And then there was a big press conference at the courthouse several weeks ago about that, the work of federal agents to effectuate arrests for people who are here undocumented, that there was a big concern about that and the jurisdiction of, who has jurisdiction of the courthouse, and that these individuals deserve due process. And so during that press conference, there were several county supervisors that said, we're going to make changes. They couldn't say what those changes were. They said, well, this is more so we're putting together all of the stakeholders that are involved with courthouse operations to come up with a better plan or guidelines for how, when, if federal agents would be working within the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
By the way, I thought this is interesting. That guidance document adds one other thing that really I think applies here. According to the guidance given to ICE in January of this year, it does indicate that these actions that happen at courthouses should take place in non-public areas of the courthouse in collaboration with court security staff using the court building's non-public entrances and exits. In other words, when the ICE agents came, the FBI came and said, we plan to arrest this person. The ICE guidance is work with the court on this. So they went and they said, we're here to do this. The court said, no, we're not playing ball. Go out in the public hallway. And then it happens to the public hallway, and some will say, well, now you've had this big show, this big display that's going to scare people. The guidance is saying do this out of public view so you don't have this impact on other court proceedings. That, I think, plays into all of this. But I don't want to wait any longer before we bring in our guest, and that is UWM Professor Emeritus of Political Science, Mordecai Lee.
Can I just also add to that last bit? So in the memorandum under the Biden administration, it also says that the exercise of judgment is required. There are a lot of similarities between the two directives for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And it says, if the enforcement action is taken due to exigent circumstances and prior approval was therefore not obtained, agency headquarters should be consulted post-action, and to the fullest extent possible, any enforcement action in or near protected areas should be taken in a non-public area outside of public view and be otherwise conducted to eliminate or at least minimize the chance that the enforcement action will restrain people from accessing that protected area.
So really, you're hearing this idea that this should be done sort of discreetly to not be disruptive, but ultimately the ICE officers here are saying they had no choice but to do it in the public hallway. And of course, we know what's happened since. I want to bring in Mordecai Lee. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happened next, because Judge Dugan, regardless of what you think of all this, is facing some very serious charges. And then the question becomes, what about her caseload? What about her? She's a sitting judge. What happens next? A pretty big action happened on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. We have UWM Professor of Political Science Mordecai Lee here on the podcast. Mordecai, thank you for joining us here on Open Record.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
So Judge Dugan is obviously facing very serious charges here. She appeared in federal court. There's one felony, one misdemeanor count, and whatever. And there's people who have a lot of strong feelings about this one way or the other. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court took pretty decisive action on Tuesday, saying that at least temporarily, while these court proceedings go on, that she is no longer a Milwaukee County judge. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and what that decision means?
You know, going back to high school civics, when we learned about the three branches of government and they're independent and they check and balance each other, we sometimes forget the detail that the judicial system, the judiciary, is an independent branch of government. And so based on the Wisconsin Constitution, the Supreme Court is the manager of the judicial branch. And in particular, the state constitution says that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the, I guess you'd say, CEO of the judicial system. And so whatever happens in terms of Judge Dugan, it's by order of the Chief Justice exercising her activity as the manager of the judicial system. And just sort of by odd coincidence, the Chief Justice is Ann Walsh Bradley, who will be serving on the Supreme Court only until August 1st, when she's stepping down voluntarily and being replaced by Judge Crawford.
So this sort of setup, these are county courts, they're county judges, but the structure is that essentially they are state employees. Is that right?
Yeah, I played a tiny role when I was in the state legislature. Governor Lucey felt that we had an antiquated judicial system, and he certainly was right. It was a better fit for the 19th century and not the 20th century. And so he promoted a constitutional amendment that would clarify that all judges were state employees, were within state government, instead of the circuit judges and the county judges being the employees of county government. And then another constitutional amendment said that all the judges were subject to disciplinary action by the state Supreme Court. And so I served on a committee that wrote the legislation to implement that constitutional amendment. And I think what Governor Lucey did was really positive and improved public administration of the judiciary. And so I'm sort of glad to boast about a minor role in that.
I was joking beforehand that it's not often we have somebody who comes on the show who was, involved in legislation from the 1970s and is still here to talk about it today. So we're so glad that you're able to fill us in with this. But I really think what stands out to me about this is that it was quick and decisive action. What is your reaction? What do you make of how quickly the Supreme Court acted here?
I think it's very important that we see that the language the court used was very general and very vague. In other words, it didn't say until the judicial proceedings in federal court are concluded or whatever it might be. It just said that it was suspending her from service. And I think the best way to interpret it is it's sort of like they were saying, okay, time out. It's not every day that a circuit judge or any judge is facing federal charges. We certainly would not want a circuit judge to be presiding over cases when she herself is subject to a proceeding in the federal court. I suspect that this is indefinite. I suspect that this will go at least until the federal proceedings are over. And then hypothetically, I'm speculating, if she were to be cleared in the criminal sense, it's still possible that the Supreme Court would rule that her behavior was inappropriate as a judge. And they have full powers in terms of how they deal with her status.
Does this action by the Supreme Court does it convey something to you about how they view her actions here? So whether they believe the actions were appropriate, or is this truly just an administrative, we're going to take a wait and see approach?
No, I think it's a little bit more than just a kind of wait and see. I think it's saying the facts are not unknown, and based on these facts, this is not okay for a sitting judge. And in other words, bang, that is it. And any further developments will be based on what happens in a court case and whatever the evidence shows. But I think the Supreme Court sent a very clear message that this is serious and this should not happen, and it is an inappropriate activity by a judge in Wisconsin.
With the criminal case going on, you mentioned there may be disciplinary stuff. How is that handled? The Judicial Commission, if I understand it, is independent of the Supreme Court. But how does that work? Would there be a complaint that is filed? Is it automatic? How does that process begin?
The Judicial Commission is actually an arm of the court system. In other words, it's an arm of the Supreme Court. It's a very secretive body. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, former Justice Gableman agreed to give up his law license because of certain behaviors that he had conducted. And I think to most average citizens, we had no idea that there was a case and an investigation and a negotiation to conclude the case. Now, in his situation, he was a former justice. He was simply a lawyer who was conducting legal business. So it probably went through a slightly different channel where the state bar plays a major role in advising the Supreme Court. But the Judicial Commission is for sitting judges dealing with any possible ethical or other standards of behavior that would be pending, and it would make an investigation, which would be secret, and it would then make a recommendation to the court, which might be secret, and then the Supreme Court would make a decision. And sometimes only when the Supreme Court issues its decision does it become public.
So if this is going to go on for some time and she is not going to be able to hear cases indefinitely, what happens? Is there another judge that's appointed in her place? Will they use reserve judges this entire time? Kind of what happens to that caseload?
I think the chief judge here in Milwaukee is really scrambling because it's not like there are a lot of judges who have time on their hands. Most court cases are quite backlogged, even in some cases backed up because of COVID. And if she is not going to be able to preside over the misdemeanor court for the indefinite future, he needs someone to take her place for a long-term basis. By long-term, I'm guessing at least 6 months, probably a year, maybe more than that if there are appeals from the federal case. So I think he's really scrambling. There are enough retired judges who would qualify to be a reserve judge. I'm skeptical there are any who want to take on really a full-time substitute status. So we might see a bit of a revolving door in terms of reserve judges. We might see the Chief Judge Ashley moving somebody from their current responsibility to the misdemeanor court and then sort of trying to cover for that if it would be easier in that case, let's say for civil cases or family law cases. But there's no doubt that this is a bump that's disruptive.
Last thing I want to ask you before we let you go is this. Big picture, is this what happened here? Does it feel to you like an escalation of the enforcement or immigration issue that's happening with Wisconsin once again as the centerpiece? Or was this just a situation, an unusual situation where a judge reacted in a way that's gotten her in some hot water? In other words, was this a one-off? Or is it, in fact, evidence of this escalating showdown over immigration?
Brian, I think the answer is all of the above. In other words, was the Trump administration sort of showboating, wanting to make as we'd say, a federal case out of it? Yes. It wasn't necessary for it to be quite that dramatic. And certainly it's unusual that the Secretary of Homeland Security and, as you mentioned, the FBI director, within hours of this happening, making public statements about it and posting online. But nonetheless, I think if we take away our sense of partisanship and how politicized almost every aspect of life seems to be nowadays in Wisconsin and in Wisconsin politics, this, in terms of the activity of the state Supreme Court, this was not about are liberals the majority of the state Supreme Court? Are conservatives the majority? I think this is a straight issue of judicial ethics and judicial behavior and code of conduct. And so there would be no ideology and no politics involved in suspending her. I think this is really a cut and dry case that tries to keep ideology and politics out of it and simply focuses on what is the appropriate conduct of any judge in Wisconsin.
Well, I'm so grateful we have access to your insight, and thank you so much for your availability. I literally texted him like 2 hours before this to say, hey, can you come on? And he's like, sure, I'll make it happen. So Mordecai Lee, thank you so much for being here once again on Open Record.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And we will go off the record when we come right back. We're back on Open Record. Before we go off the record, Bill makes a good point. I left out the whole thing that was in my notes. What's next for Judge Dugan?
Well, we know that Judge Dugan is set to be back in federal court, not this coming week, but May 15th for a preliminary hearing. She was charged by a complaint, which means that a case is brought before a judge signs off on that, and charges are filed. But she has not been indicted. We do know that prosecutors noted to Magistrate Judge Stephen Dries last week on Friday that they intend to seek an indictment in the case, so that when Judge Dugan is set to be back in court, it's possible that hearing may be converted from a preliminary hearing for the complaint to an arraignment and plea hearing, which would be the next step if someone is indicted.
And the indictment takes the grand jury, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's a secretive proceeding, so we don't know for sure when that's going to happen.
Correct. It's a secretive proceeding. We do know in other districts, other federal districts, that there are more than a dozen people who are pulled in. They may meet once a week, several times a week, several weeks every month, more or less, where they are presented with evidence. They can compel evidence. There are no judges. There are generally no defense attorneys that are part of these proceedings. And the grand jury would look at that evidence and say whether or not crimes have been committed and whether they would issue a bill of an indictment or no bill.
Thank you for reminding me that we hadn't done that part. And now we can go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question Sarah has prepared for us. What do you have today?
All right. We had the story earlier this week on Wake Up, and in the newsroom, it stirred up so much chatter that I was like, this is going to be a good off the record. Okay. In a hypothetical question, who wins in a fight between 100 men and one gorilla? The men don't have weapons. It's just 100 men and one gorilla. Who wins?
I would like to say 100 men could come up with a plan
You're
to
wrong.
stop one gorilla.
No.
What do you mean I'm wrong?
There's no way.
That
gorilla's going to destroy all 100 of them.
This is a thought experiment, right?
Oh, sorry.
There's not a right or wrong. It's just, you're just saying, in your opinion, I'm wrong.
You're right.
Bill? Bill's thinking hard about this.
This goes back to a long-standing lunch discussion that friends had in college, and it's very similar to this, of whether you could out-wrestle a gorilla or out-juke a lion. Like what was more what was more likely?
Yeah.
I think the animal wins regardless.
But 100 men. So think about it. 100 men, unless they're fighting like they do in movies where they come one at a time and the gorilla takes all of them down. If 100 men just pile on top of the gorilla, the weight alone would crush it.
I would say I'm team gorilla. If 100 men are coming for a gorilla, I think the gorilla's deserves the right to.
I just have. I don't know. Who are the 100 men? I guess are they?
I imagine they're going to just be like, "Let's go, guys."
100 MMA fighters.
Have a plan.
Well, that's.
And then if
true.
everyone thinks they have the right arm.
Is there a leader?
No. Where did this come from, and why are we talking about it?
I don't know. It was on X, and so it was just like a hypothetical question, but it like stirred up all this debate, and I just
have more belief in the
like
ingenuity of men that they would come up with a plan to take down the gorilla. It's only one gorilla. It's just one, right? Like 5 of them could lull it into a sense of security by, playing with it and being nice, and the other 95 come in and take it out.
Okay.
Well, Brian, I hope the gorilla shows up to your door in the middle of the night.
That's the mindset.
I didn't say I'm not going to be the first of the 100 men. There's going to be 99 that go before me before I jump in. I hope they've taken care of it by then.
You good, guys?
All right, we got to wrap this thing up. We'll do that when we come right back. That is all the time we have for Open Record. Team Human here against Team Gorillas, I guess. Apparently I'm wrong. Anyway, if you have an issue you'd like us to investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. Thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. That is Sarah Smith, Bill Miston, Dave Machuda, and behind the video switcher today, it's Tim Primo. With that, I'm Bryan Polcyn, and we'll be back next week.